Good morning. This is a new day, and this is a sunny day. And today is for in China. Today is autumn festival. In autumn festival, we eat moon cake. Uh, we call it moon cake. We made a cake circle, round cake, because in China, we talk about 团团圆圆, means round, stick together and round. This means happy life. And in this festival, we eat this kind of cake and go to, watch the moon at night because today is the moon, a full moon. And there's a say 15th moon, 16th moon rounder than 15th moon. This is, I think, Yinli, how do I say? The moon, sorry, I can't remember the word, Yinli. Let's see what Yinli is. Let's check. Yinli. Oh. Yinli or lunar calendar, 叫 is lunar calendar. So in China, we use both Yinli lunar calendar and let's see, Yangli, and the solar calendar. Lunar calendar, we celebrate a lot of Chinese festival like moon cake festival. For these young kids, they don't know autumn festival, but they know moon cake festival because we eat moon cake. And we have 端午节. It's lunar festival. This is lunar calendar. It's May 5th. May 5th of lunar calendar. In that festival, we eat a kind of food. It's wiped with a kind of leaves. We wipe it, wipe those sticky rice, gluten rice. We wipe gluten rice in it, and put meat in the rice and steam it, not steam, boil it for hours, for hours, because the gluten rice is raw. We boil it for hours, then the rice stick together very tightly and really taste. I like those kind of food very, very much, and I cook those kind of food. They call in Chinese, we call it 粽子. Yes, and I make it every year because I really like this kind of food, and I will make moon cake today. I already made the inside part. let's see what 线 is. 线 feeling. I already feeling. I already made filling with green beans. Because we use all kinds of filling. At first we only use those sweet filling. But recently, people think, oh, it's too sweet and it tastes not very good. Not very good. Let's see. Greasy. Okay, oil in the filling. You know, even when I cook green bean, I boil, then it till it or it you can smash it easily. Then put oil and to fry it, so fry out those water. Then the but it still can stick together. Yeah, but when we are we were kids, we don't have a lot of things to good things to eat. We can fool ourselves, but no good quality food. So we don't mind those sweet, very sweet cake. But recently people don't like too sweet things because it's not healthy. So people make, they put meat in cake. They put so make it salty, yeah, salty cake. At first only sweet cake. Just recently, people think a lot of health problem, those things. So yeah, that's all for our mooncake introduce. Let's read. Yesterday we already know Captain 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 Cruz is they haven't found him yet. No, let's see. Can they find him today? If not, he may die, but I know they found it. They found him. They found him. Let's read. Was thus their hunger was thus appeased for the time, but not the thirst. Yes, but not their thirst, which increased after eating this naturalist-based Malu. Let's see, because this writer he knew a lot of those things. Oh, 软体动物. Okay. Mollusk. Mollusk.
Mollusk.
Mollusk. Yesterday we just don't want to. I think the name of a kind of a kind of shell. Naturalists best mollusk. They had then to find fresh water. They had then to find fresh water, and it was likely that it would be wanting in such a uneven region. Would be wanting in such a capricious 变化无常的
capricious,
啊
capricious,
capricious not capricious 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 变幻莫测的变化无常的变化无常变幻莫测的 uneven reason, Pencroft and have precautions of collecting an ample supply of Dithyldum. Precaution after having taken the precaution of collecting an ample supply. 大量的 ample yes yes 大量的 ample supply of this I like this color of Dithyldum. Dithyldum 哦，不知道是啥。石湾地 Dithyldums, with which they fill their pocket and handcrafts and handkerchiefs regain the foot of the cliff. 200 piece further, 200 piece further, they arrive at the cutting, through which, and as Pencroft had guessed, ran a stream of water. Through which, as Pencroft had guessed, they arrived at the cutting, ran a stream of water, or not was to be ascertained. Whether fresh or not was to be ascertained. At this place, the wall appeared to have been separated by some violent subterranean force.不是大 sub 地表的地下 subterranean地下的隐藏的 by some violent subterranean force. At its base was hollowed out a little creek. At its base was hollowed out a little creek. The the farthest part of which, at its base, was hollowed out a little creek. The farthest part. Let's see. Farthest. 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 The
farthest,
farthest. Farthest. The farthest part, subterranean. Farthest. The farthest part of which form a tolerable, tolerably sharp angle. The watercourse at that part measured feet in beneath, and its two banks on each side were scarcely 20 feet high. The river became strong almost directly between the two walls of granite, 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 granite. 我读错了
granite,
granite. Granite. Two walls of granite, which began to sink above the mouth. It then suddenly turned and disappeared beneath a wood of stunned tree, half a mile off. Here is the water, and yonder is the wood we required, and yonder 后面 yonder 那里的and yonder is the wood we require, sighed Pencroft. Well, Herbert, now we only want the house. The water of the river was limpid. Limpid, 清澈的 The water of the river was The water of the river was limpid. The sailor ascertained at this time, that is to say, at low tide, when the rising flood didn't reach it, it was sweet. Oh, it was sweet. This important point established. Herbert looked for some cavity with a retreat, but in vain. Cavity. 洞 Okay. 洞 Some cavity which would serve them as a retreat, but in vain. Retreat. Serve them as retreat. 静居处，静居处。But in one, everywhere the wall appeared smooth, plain, and perpendicular, perpendicular. perpendicular. perpendicular.
Perpendicular. Perpendicular. Perpendicular.
Perpendicular.
Perpendicular. Perpendicular.
Perpendicular. Oh, perpendicular. 这 perpendicular 垂直的，垂直的 and perpendicular. However, at the mouth of watercourse and above the reach of the high tide, the convulsion of nature had formed. The convulsion had formed not a grotto, but a pair of enormous rocks, such as are often met with in granite country, and which bear the name of chimneys, formed. Convulsion 昨天学过了，震动哦 convulsion。However, at the mouth of water course and above the convulsion of nature, the convulsion 震动。The convulsion of nature had formed not a grotto, but a pair of not a grotto. Grotto 岩洞洞穴。Not a grotto, but enormous rocks, such as are often met with the granite countries and which bear the name of chimney. Pencroft and Herbert penetrate quite far in among the rocks by sandy passages in which light was not wanting, for it entered through the opening which were left between the blocks, of which some were only sustained by a miracle of equilibrium. Through the opening which were left between the blocks, of which some were only sustained by a miracle of equilibrium. 平衡 equilibrium.
equilibrium, equilibrium,
Miracle equilibrium 平衡平静 which some were only sustained by a miracle of equilibrium, but with the latch came also air, a regular corridor gale, corridor gale 是大风 ，corridor 呢 ？corridor 走廊哦 ，OK。
corridor,
corridor 走廊通道的。过堂风 corridor gale, and with the wind, the sharp cold from the exterior. However, the sailor thought that by stopping up some of the opening with a mixture of stone and sand, the chimney could be rendered habitable. They are geometrical plan represent the typographical sign, and which signifies abridged, but by isolating the uppermost of the sign. Okay. Represent the typographical 印刷体 typographical 印刷体 typographical sign, this one, which signify etc. Abridged 缩写 abridged. They are geometrical plan. Geometrical 几何的 geometrical
geometrical,
geometrical 几何图案的几何图案几何别的 Their geometrical plan represent the typographical sign which signifies etc. Abridged, but by isolating the uppermost of the sign, the south and the west wind blow so strongly they could succeed in making the lower part of use. Here's our work, said Pencroft, and if we ever seen Captain, we will know how to make something of this labyrinth. Labyrinth, 迷宫. Oh, we already.
labyrinth,
Labyrinth. labyrinth. We shall see him again. We shall see him again. We shall see him again. Pencroft. We shall see him again, Pencroft. We shall see him again, Pencroft, cried Herbert. And when he returns, he must find a tolerable dwelling here. It will be so, if we can make a fireplace in the left passage, and keep an opening for the smoke. So we can, my boy, replied the sailor, and these chimneys will serve our turn. Let's set to work, but first come and get a store of fuel. I think some branches will be very useful in stopping up this opening. Through which the wind shrinks like so many fans.恶魔 like so many fans. Like so many fans. Herbert and Pencroft left the chimney. and turning the angle, they began to climb the left bank of the river. And Pencroft left the chimneys and turned the angle. They began to climb the left bank of the river. The current here was quite rapid and drifted down some dyed wood. The rising tide, and it could already be perceived back with force to a considerable distance. The sailor then thought that they could utilize this ebb and flow for the transport of heavy objects. The rising tide, and it could already be perceived, must drive it back with force to a considerable distance. They began to climb the left bank of the river. The current here was quite rapid and drifted down some dead wood. After having walked for a quarter of an hour, the sailor and the boy arrived at the angle which the river made in turning toward the left. From this point, its course was pursued through a forest of magnificent trees. These trees still retained their verdure. 青翠. Great! These trees still retained their verdure, notwithstanding the advanced season, for they belonged to the family of Coniferae, which is spread over all the region of the globe, from northern climates to the tropics. The young naturalist recognized especially the Didaro, which are very numerous in the Himalayan, and which spread around them a most agreeable odor. Between these beautiful trees sprang out cluster of fir sprung up cluster 一丛丛的 cluster sprung 冷杉 sprung up cluster of firs 冷杉 Let's see, is it fir? Fir, yes. Why spring up? Spring up, 跳起。哦，迅速成长，当然有跳起的意思，但这个地方就是迅速成长。迅速成长。sprung up clusters of firs, opaque, 无光泽的，灰暗的 opaque, whose opaque 不透明的，昏暗的，灰暗的，灰暗的 open parasol, bulges parasol 太阳伞 parasol
Parasol.
parasol parasol balls parasol ball 大树枝啊
Bough.
bough 大树枝 Open parasol boughs spread wide around. Among the long grass, Pencroft felt that his feet were crushing dry branches, which crackled like fireworks. Well, my boy, said he to Herbert, if I don't know the name of these trees, at any rate, I reckon that we may call them burning wood, and just now that's the chief thing we want. Let's get a supply, replied Herbert, who immediately set to work. The collection was easily made. It was not even necessary to lope the trees, for enormous quantities of dried wood were laying at their feet. But if fuel was not wanting, the means of the transporting was not yet found. The wood, being very dry, would burn rapidly. It was therefore necessary to carry to the chimney a considerable quantity, and the load of 2 men would not be sufficient. Herbert remarked this. Well, my boy, replied the sailor, there must be some way of carrying this wood. There is always a way of doing everything. If we had a cart or a boat, it would be easy enough. But we have the river, said Herbert. Right, replied Pencroft. The river will be to us like a road, and the raft have not been intended for nothing. 流 raft 木筏 木筏，木筏。And rafts have not been invented for nothing. Only, observed Herbert, at this moment our road is going the wrong way, for the tide is rising. We shall be all right if we wait till it ebbs. We shall be all right. We shall be all right if we wait till it ebbs, replied the sailor, and then we will trust it to carry our fuel to the chimney. Let's get the raft ready. The sailor, followed by Herbert, directed his steps toward the river. They both carried each in proportion to his strength a load of wood bound in fagot. In fagot，抬把，捆 ，faggot。
Faggot.
Bound in fagot，一把一把的束索。A load of wood bound in fagot. They found on the bank also a great quantity of dead branches in the midst of the grass, among which the foot of man had probably never before trod. The foot of man had probably never before trod. To make his raft in a kind of little bay, created by a point of the shore which broke the current. The sailor had the lad placed a more good-sized piece of wood in the kind of little bay created by a point of shore which broke the current. The sailor and the lad placed some good-sized piece of wood, which they had fastened together with dry creepers. 藤，蔓生植物。Dry creepers. A raft was thus formed, on which they stackled all they had collected. They stacked all they had collected, sufficient, indeed, to have loaded at least 20 men. In an hour, the work was finished, and the raft moored to the bank awaited the turning of the tide. There was still several hours to be occupied, and with one consent, Pencroft and Herbert resolved to gain the upper plateau so as to have a more extended view of the surrounding country. Upper plateau. 崖吧 plateau Plateau.
Plateau.
Upper Plateau. Gaoyuan. To gain the upper plateau so as to have a good extended view of the surrounding country. Exactly 200 feet behind the angle formed by the river. The wall terminated by a fall of rocks. Died away in a gentle slope. To the edge of the forest. It was a natural staircase. Exactly 200 feet. Exactly 200 feet behind the angle formed by the river. The wall terminated by a fall of rocks. Slope to the edge of the forest. It was a nature staircase. Herbert and the sailor began their ascent. Thanks to the vigor of their muscle, they reached the summit in a few minutes. Vigor. Thanks to the vigor of their muscles, they reached the summit in a few minutes and proceeded to the point above the mouth of the river. On attaining it, their first look was cast upon the ocean, which not long before they had traversed in such a terrible condition. They observed with emotion all that part to the north of the coast on which the catastrophe had taken place. It was there that Carus Harding, 格兰特 that Carus Harding had disappeared. They looked to see if some portion of the balloon, to which a man might possibly cling, yet existed. Nothing. The sea but one vast watery desert. As to the coast, it was solitary also. Neither the reporter nor Neb could be anywhere seen. As to the coast, it was solitary also. Neither the reporter nor Neb could be anywhere seen, but it was possible that at this time they were both too far away to be perceived. Something tells me, cried Herbert, that a man as energetic as Captain Harding would not let himself be drowned like other people. He must have reached some point of the shore. Don't you think so, Pencroft? The sailor shook his head sadly. He little expected ever to see Carus Harding again, but wishing to leave some hope to Herbert. Doubtless, said he, our engineer Our engineer is a man who would get out of a scrape to which anyone else would yield. Would scrape. 哦，yield 是去数。Scrape. Let's see, scrape. 你可以说伤 ，OK， 刮伤应该它是 would get out of a scrape to which anyone else would yield. In the meantime, he examined the coast with great attention. Stretched out below them was the sandy shore, bounded on the right of the river's mouth by a line of breakers. Bounded on the right of the river's mouth by lines of breakers. The rocks which were visible appeared like amphibious monsters. Amphibious. 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 Amphibious.
Amphibious.
Amphibious.
Amphibious.
Amphibious. 氧气的 amphibious, like amphibious monster reposing in the surf. Beyond the reef, the sea sparkled beneath the sun's rays. To the south, a sharp point closed the horizon. It will to the south, a sharper point closed the horizon, and it could not be seen if the land was prolonged in that direction. To the south, a sharp point closed the horizon, and it could not be seen if the land was prolonged in that direction. To the north horizon, and it could not be seen if the land was prolonged in that direction, or if it ran southeast and southwest, which would have made this coast a very long peninsula. At the northern extremity of the bay, the outer shore was continued to a great distance in a wider curve. There the shore was low, flat, without cliffs, and with great bank of sand which the tide left uncovered. Pencroft and Herbert then returned towards the west. Their attention was first arrested by the snow-topped mountain, which consisted of 6 first declivities. From its first declivities to within 2 miles of the coast were spread vast masses of wood, relieved by large green patches caused by the presence of evergreen trees. Then, from the edge of this forest to the shore extended a plain, scattered irregularly with groups of trees. Here and there on the left sparkled through glades or water of the little its wind course. They could choose its winding course back towards the spurs of the mountain, among which it seemed to spring. At the point where the sailor had left his raft of food, it began to run between two high granite walls. But if on the left bank the wall remained clear and abrupt, on the right bank, on the contrary, it sank gradually. The massive side changed to isolated rocks, the rocks to stone, the stones to singular running to the. Are we on an island? Murmured the sailor. At any rate, it seemed to be big enough to glide land. An island ever so big is an island all the same, Rob. But this important question could not yet be answered. A more perfect had to be made to settle the point. A more perfect survey had to be made to settle the point. As to the land itself, island or continent, a more perfect survey had to be made to settle the point. As to the land itself, island or continent, it appeared fertile. As to the land itself, island or continent, it appeared fertile, agreeable in its aspect, and varied. This is satisfactory, observed Pencroft. And in our misfortune, we must thank Providence for it. We must thank Providence for this. God be praised. God be praised, responded Herbert, whose pious heart was full of gratitude to the author of all things.
Pious.
Whose pious heart was full of gratitude to the author of all things. Pencroft and Herbert examined for some time the country on which Pencroft and Herbert examined for some time the country on which they had been cast, but it was difficult to guess after so hasty an inspection which the future had in store for them. But it was difficult to guess after so hasty an inspection. What the future had in store for them. They then returned to follow the southern crest of the granite. Granite platform, bordered by a long fringe of rocks of the most whimsical shapes. Some hundreds of birds lived there, nestled in the holes of the stone. Herbert jumped over the rocks, startled a whole flock of these winged creatures. "Oh," cried he, "those are not gulls, nor seamews." "Those are not gulls, nor seamews. What are they then?" asked Pencroft. "Upon my word, one would say they were pigeons." "They were pigeons, just so, but these are wild or rock pigeons." "Yes, just so, but these are wild or rock pigeons. I recognize them by the double band of black on the wing, by the white tail, and by the slate-colored plumage. But if the rock pigeon is good to eat, its egg must be excellent, and we will soon see how many they may have left in their nest. We will not give them time to hatch, unless it is in the shape of an omelette," replied Pencroft merrily. "But what will you make your omelette in?" "Omelette,"煎蛋饼，煎蛋饼。"We will not give them time to hatch, unless it is in the shape of an omelette," replied Pencroft merrily. "But what will you make your omelette in?" asked Herbert. "In your head?" "Well," replied the sailor, "I'm not quite conjured enough for that." conjure， 看看弄下来了没有啊？conjure in it in your head. I'm not quite conjure enough for that. No. To see.
Conjurer, conjurer.
I'm not 变戏法的人，魔术师。I'm not quite conjure enough for that. We must come down to eggs in the shell, my boy, and I shall undertake to dispatch the hardest. To dispatch 要钱的 hardest. The hardest. I will undertake to dispatch the hardest. Undertake 承担 I will 承诺 I will undertake to dispatch the hardest. 你见 hardest. The hardest. Only. Pencroft Pencroft and Herbert attentively examined the cavities in the granite, and they really found eggs in some of the hollows being collected or packed in the sailor's handkerchief. And as the time when the tide would be full was approached, Pencroft and Herbert began to redescend towards the watercourse. When they arrived there, it was an hour after midday. The tide had already turned. They must now avail themselves of the ebb to take the wood to the mouth. Pencroft didn't intend to let the raft go away in the current without guidance. Neither did he mean to embark on it himself to steer it. Embark on it. Then what? Embark on it himself to steer it. But a sailor is never at a loss when there is a question of cables or ropes, and Pencroft rapidly twisted a cord, a few fathoms long, made of dry creepers. This vegetable cable was fastened on the after part of the raft, and the sailor held it in his hand while Herbert pushing off the craft with a long rope. Pole, keep it in the current. This succeeded capitally. The enormous load of wood drifted down the current. The bank was very equal. There was no fear that the raft would run aground, and before 2 o'clock they arrived at the river mouth, a few paces from the chimney. Chapter 5. Oh, still hadn't found Captain. Pencroft's first care after unloading the raft was to render the cave habitable by stopping holes which made it draughty. After unloading the raft was to render the cave habitable by stopping up all the holes which made it draughty. Sandy stones, twisted branches, or white clay. Sand, stones, twisted branches, white clay closed up the galleries upon to the south wind. One narrow and windy opening at the side was kept, to lead out the smoke and to make the fire draw. and to make the fair draw. The cave was thus divided into 3 or 4 rooms. The cave was thus divided into 3 or 4 rooms. Such dark dens, if such dark dens with which a donkey would scarcely have been contented deserved the name. If such dark dens with which a donkey would scarcely have been contented deserved the name, but they were dry and to stand upright, at least in the principal room, which occupied the center. The floor was covered taking all in all they were well pleased with it for want of a better. Perhaps, said Herbert, while he and Pencroft were walking, our companies have found a superior place to us. Very likely, replied the seaman, but as we don't know, we must work all the same. Better to have 2 strings to one's bow than 1 string at all. Better to have 2 strings to one's bow than no string at all. Oh, exclaimed Herbert, how jolly it will be if they were to find Captain Harding and were to bring him back with them. Yes, indeed, said Pencroft, that was a man of the right sort. That was a man of the right sort. Was, exclaimed Herbert. Do you despair? Do you despair of ever seeing him again? God forbid, replied the sailor. Their work was soon done, and Pencroft declared himself very well satisfied. God forbid. Their work was soon done, and Pencroft declared himself very well satisfied. Now, said he, our friends can come back when they like. They will find a good enough shelter. They now had only to make a fireplace and to prepare the supper, an easy task. Large flat stones were placed on the ground at the opening of the narrow passage which had been kept. This, if the smoke didn't take the heat out with it. This, if the smoke didn't take the heat out with it, would be enough to maintain an equal inside. Their wood was stowed away in one of the rooms. And the sailor laid in the fireplace some log and brushwood. The seaman was busy with this when Herbert asked him if he had any matches. Certainly, replied Pencroft, and I may say happily, for without matches or candle we should be in a fix. Still we might get fair as the savage do, replied Herbert, by rubbing two bits of dry stick, one against the other. All right, try, my boy, and let's see if you can do anything beside exercising your arms. Well, it's a very simple proceeding and much used in the island of the Pacific. I don't deny it, replied Pencroft, but the savage must know how to do it, or employ a peculiar wood. For more than once I have tried get fair in that way, but I could never manage it. I must say I prefer matches. By the by, where are my matches? Pencroft searched in his waistcoat waistcoat for the box, which was always there, for he was a confirmed smoker. He could not find it. He rummaged the pocket of his trousers. He rummaged the pockets of his trousers, but to his horror, he could nowhere discover the box. "Here's a go," said he, looking at Herbert. "The box must have fallen out of my pocket and got lost. Surely, Herbert, you must have something, a tinder box, anything that can possibly make fair." "No, uh, no, I haven't, Pencroft." The sailor rushed out, followed by the boy. On the sand among the rocks near the river bank they both searched carefully, but in vain. The box of copper, the box of copper, and therefore would have been easily seen. "Pencroft," asked Herbert, "did you throw it out of the car?" I knew better, but such a small article could easily disappear in the trembling about we have gone through. I would rather even have lost my pipe. Confound the box! Confound the box! Where can it be? "Look here, the tide is going down," said Herbert. "Let's run to the place where we landed." It was scarcely probable that they would find the box, which the wave had rolled about among the pebbles, at high tide, but it was as well to try. Herbert and Pencroft walked rapidly to the point where they had landed the day before, about 200 feet from the cave. They hunted there among the shingle in the cleft of the rock, but found nothing. If the box had fallen at this place, it must have been swept away by the wave. As the sea went down, they searched every little crevice, now with no result. It was a grave loss in the circumstance, and for the time irreparable, 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 irreparable. Oh, a irreparable.
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 And for the time, irreparable. Pencroft could not hide his vexation. 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 Let's see. Is it vexation? No. Yes, vexation.
vexation,
could not hide his vexation. He looked very anxious, but said not a word. Herbert tried to console him by observing that if they had found the matches, they would very likely have been wetted by the sea and useless. No, my boy, replied the sailor. They were in a copper box, which shut very tightly. 铜 铜的 They were in a copper box, which shut very tightly, and now what are they to do? We shall certainly find some way of making a fire, said Herbert. Captain Harding or Mr. Spilett will not be without them. Will not be without them. Yes, replied Pencroft, but in the meantime, will not be. But in the meantime, we are without fare, and our companies will find but a sorry repast on the return. But, said Herbert quickly, do you think it possible that they have no tinder or matches? I doubt it, replied the sailor, shaking his head. For either Neb nor Captain Harding smoke, and I believe that Mr. Spilett would rather keep his notebook than his matchbox. Herbert didn't reply. The loss of the box was certainly to be regretted, but the boy was still sure of procuring fare in some way or other. Pencroft, more experienced, didn't think so. Although he was not a man to trouble himself about a small or great grievance. At any rate, there was only one thing to be done, to await the return of Neb and report up the feast of hard egg. But they must give up the feast of hard egg, which they had meant to prepare, and a meal of raw flesh was not an agreement either for themselves or for the others. Before returning the cave, the sailor and Herbert, in the event of fare being positively unattainable, collected some more shellfish, and then silently retraced their steps to the walling. Pencroft, his eye fixed on the ground, still looked for his box. He even climbed up the left bank of the river from its mouth to the angle where the raft had been moored. He returned to the plateau, went over it in every direction, searched among the high grass on the border of the forest, all in vain. It was 5 in the evening when he and Herbert re-entered the cave. It is useless to say that the darkest corner of the passage were ransacked before they were obliged to give it up in despair. Towards 6 o'clock, when the sun was disappearing behind the high lands of the west, Herbert, who was walking up and down on the strand, signalized the return of Neb and Spilett. They were returning alone. The boy's heart sank. The sailor hadn't been deceived in his forebodings. Hadn't the sailor been deceived in his forebodings? The engineer, Carlos Harding, had not been found. The reporter, on his arrival, sat down on a rock without saying anything, exhausted with fatigue, dying of hunger. He had not strength to utter a word. As to Neb, his red eyes showed how he had cried, and the tears which he could not restrain told too clearly that he had lost all hope. The reporter recounted all that they had done in the attempted to recover Carus Harding. He and Neb had surveyed the coast for the distance of 8 miles and consequently much beyond the place where the balloon had fallen the last time but one. A fall which was followed by the disappearance of the engineering and the dogtop. The shore was solitary, not a vestige of a mark. The shore was solitary, not a vestige of a mark, not even a pebble recently displaced, not a trace on the sand, not a human footstep on all that part of the beach. It was clear that that portion of the shore had never been visited by a human being. The sea was as deserted as land, and it was there, a few hundred feet from the coast, that the engineer must have found a tomb. As Spilett ended his account, Neb exclaimed in a voice which showed how hope struggled within him. "No, he is not dead. He can't be dead. It might happen to anyone else, but never to him. He could get out of anything." Then his strength forsaking him. "Oh, I can do no more," he murmured. "Neb," said Herbert, running to him, "we will find him. God will give him back to us. But in the meantime you are hungry, and you must eat something." So saying, he offered the poor negro a few handfuls, which was indeed wretched food. Neb had not eaten anything for several hours, but he refused them. He would not live without his master. As to Gideon Spilett, he devoured the shellfish. Then he laid himself down on the sand at the foot of a rock. He was very weak, but calm. Herbert went up to him and taking his head, "Sir," and taking his hand, "Sir," said he, "we have found a shelter which will be better than laying here. Night is advancing. Come and rest. Tomorrow we will search further." The reporter got up and, guided by the boy, went towards the cave. On the way, Pencroft asked him in the most natural tone if, by the chance, he happened to have a match or two. The reporter stopped felt in his pocket, but finding nothing, said, "I had some, but I must have thrown them away." The seaman then put the same question to Neb and received the same answer. "Confound it! Confound it!" exclaimed it. "Confound it!" exclaimed the sailor. The reporter heard him and seizing his arm. "Have you no matches?" "Not one, and no fear in the consequence." "Ah!" cried Neb, "if my master were here, he would know what to do." The four castaways remained motionless, looking uneasily at each other. Herbert was the first to break the silence by saying, "Mr. Spilett, you are a smoker and always have matches about you. Perhaps you haven't looked well. Try again. A single match will be enough." The reporter hunted again in the pockets of his trousers, waistcoat and greatcoat, and at least to Pencroft's great joy, and at last, to Pencroft's great joy, no less to his extreme surprise, he felt a tiny piece of wood entangled in the lining of his waistcoat. He seized it with his finger through the stuff, but he could not get it out. If this was a match, and a single one, it was of great importance not to rub off the phosphorus. "Will you let me try?" said the boy, and very cleverly, without breaking it, he managed to draw out the weighted yet precious little bit of wood, which was of such great importance to this poor man. It was unused. "Hush! Hurrah!" cried Pencroft. "It is as good as having a whole kangaroo." He took the match, and followed by his company, entered the cave. This small piece of wood, of which so many in an inhabited country are wasted with indifference and are of no value, must be used with the greatest caution. The sailor first make sure it was quite dry. "That done, we must have some paper," said he. "Here," replied Spilett, after some hesitation, tearing a leaf out of his notebook. Pencroft took the piece of paper which the reporter held out to him, and place. Some handful of grass, leaves, and dry moss were placed under the fagot, and disposed in such a way that the air could not easily circulate, and the dry wood would rapidly catch fire. Pencroft then twisted the piece of paper into a shape of cone, as smokers do in a high wind, and poked it in among the moss. For the fagot, we already learned it. Fagot, 柴板，对。柴板 and disposed in such a way 处理处置安排。In such a way that the air could easily circulate. Pencroft then twisted the piece of paper cone as smokers do in a high wind, and poked it in among the moss. Taking a small rough stone, he wiped it carefully, and with a beating heart, holding his breath, he gently rubbed the match. The first attempt didn't produce any effect. Pencroft had not struck hard enough, failed to rub off um, the phosphorus. "No, I can't do it," said he. "My hand trembles. The match had missed fire. I can't, I will not." And rising, he told Herbert to take his place. Certainly the boy had never been nervous. Prometheus going to steal the fire from heaven could not have been anxious. Prometheus, 恶魔 Prometheus 普罗米修斯啊 Prometheus going to steal the fire from heaven could not have Prometheus could not have been more anxious. He didn't hesitate, however, but struck the match directly. A little sputtering was heard, a little spluttering was heard, and a tiny blue flame sprang up, make a choking smoke. Herbert quickly turned the match so as to augment the flame. Augment the flame. Augment 增强。Turn the match so as to 增强。Herbert quickly turned the match so as to augment the flame, and then split it into the paper cone, which is a few seconds to and then the moss, which in a few seconds too caught fire. A minute later, the dry wood crackled, and the cheerful flame, assisted by the vigorous blowing of the sailor, sprang up in the midst of the darkness. "At last!" cried Pencroft, getting up. "I was never so nervous before in all my life." The flat stones make a capital fireplace. The flat stone made a capital fireplace. The smoke went easily out at the narrow passage. The chimney drew, and an agreeable warmth was not long in being felt. in being felt, and agreeable warmth was not long in being felt. They must now take great care and always to keep some embers alight. It not needed care and attention. It only needed care and attention, as they had plenty of wood and could renew the store at any time. Pencroft's first thought was to use the fire by nourishing, nourishing supper, then a dish of shellfish. 2 dozen eggs were brought by Herbert. The reporter leaning up in a corner. Watched this preparation without saying anything. A threefold thought weighed on his mind. Was Cruz still alive? If he was alive, where was he? If he had survived from his fall, how was it that he had not found some means of making known his existence? As to Neb, he was roaming about the shore. He was like a body without a soul. Pencroft knew 50 ways of cooking eggs, but this time he had no choice, and was obliged to content himself with roasting them under the hot cinders. 煤渣。hot cinders. In a few minutes, the cooking was done. Invited the reporter to take his share of the supper. Such was the first repast on this unknown coast. Such was the first repast. Such was the first repast of castaways. The hard egg was excellent, and as eggs contain everything indispensable to man's nutriment, these poor people thought themselves well off, and were much strengthened by them. Oh, if only one of them had not been missing at this meal! If the 5 prisoners who escaped from Richmond had been all there, under the piled-up rocks, before this clear, crackling fire on the dry sand, was thanksgiving must they have rendered to heaven. But the most ingenuous, the most learned, he who was the unquestioned chief, Cyrus Harding, was, alas, missing, and his body had not even obtained a burial place. Thus passed the 20th of March. Night had come on. Outside could be heard the howling of the wind and the monotonous sound surf breaking on the shore. The waves The waves rode the singular backward and forward. The waves rode the singular backwards and forwards with a deafening noise. The reporter retired into a dark corner after having shortly noted down the uh, occurrence of the day. Occurrence, 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 occurrence.
Occurrence.
Occurrence. After have shortly noted down the occurrence of the day, the first appearance of this new land, the loss of their leader, the exploration of the coast, the incident of the Magic Act, and they overcome their fatigue, get his sorrow in sleep. Herbert went to sleep directly. As to the sailor, he passed the night with one eye on the fire, on which he didn't spare fuel. On which he didn't. But one of the castaways did not sleep in the cave. The inconsolable, despairing Neb, notwithstanding all that his company could say to induce him to take some rest, wandered all night long on the shore, calling on his master. The inventory of the articles possessed by these castaways from the clouds thrown upon a coast which appeared to be uninhabited, was soon made out. They had nothing save the clothes which they were wearing at the time of the catastrophe. We must mention, however, a notebook and a watch which Spilett had kept, doubtless by inadvertence, not a weapon, not a tool, not even a pocket knife. For while in the car they had thrown out everything to lighten the balloon. The imaginary heroes of Daniel Defoe, or of Wyss, as well as Selkirk and Renault, shipwrecked on June 14th and on the archipelago of the Auckland, were never in such destitution. Either they had abundant resource from the stranded vessel in green cattle tools, ammunition, ammunition, or else something was thrown up on the coast, which supplied them with all the first necessary of life. But there, not any instrument whatever, not a utensil, from nothing, they must supply themselves with everything. And yet, if Cyrus Harding had been with them, if the engineer could have brought his practical sense, his inventive mind to bear on the situation, not have been lost. Alas, they must hope no longer. They must hope no longer again to seek castaways could expect nothing but from themselves and from that providence which never abandoned those whose faith is sincere. But ought they to establish themselves on this part of the coast, without trying to know to what continent it belonged, it, if it was inhabited, or if they were on the shore of a desert island? It was an important question and should be solved with the shortest possible delay. From its answer, they would know what measure to take. However, according to Pencroft's advice, it appeared best to wait a few days before commencing an exploration. They must in fact prepare some provisions and procure some more strengthened food than eggs and molasses. The explorer, before undertaking new fatigues, must first of all recruit their strength. The chimney of a retreat sufficient for the present. The chimney offered a retreat sufficient for the present. The fire was lighted, and it was easily to preserve some it was easier to preserve some embers. There were plenty of shellfishes and eggs among the rocks and on the beach. It would be easy to kill a few of pigeons which were flying by hundreds above the summit of the plateau, either with sticks or stones. Perhaps the trees of the neighboring forest would supply them with eatable fruit. Lastly, the sweet water was there. It was accordingly settled that for a few days they would remain at Chimney so as to prepare themselves for an expedition, either along the shore or into the interior of the country. This plan suited Neb particularly, as obstinate in his idea as in his presentiment. He was in no haste to abandon this part of the coast, the scene of the catastrophe. He would not believe in the loss of Cruz Harding. No, it did that such a man had ended in this vulgar fashion, carried away by a wave, drowned in the floods, a few hundred yards from shore. As long as the wave had not cast up the body of the engineer, as long as he, Neb, had not seen with his eyes, touched with his hand, the corpse of his master, he would not believe in his death. And this idea rooted itself deeper than ever in his determined heart. An illusion, perhaps, but still an illusion to be respected, and one which the sailor did not wish to destroy. As for him, he hoped no longer, but there was no use in he was like the dog who will not leave the place where his master is buried, and his grief was such that most possible he would not survive him. This same morning, the 26th of March, at daybreak, Neb had set out on the shore in a northerly direction. and he had returned the spot where the sea no doubt had closed over the unfortunate Harding. The day's breakfast was composed solely of penguins' eggs and thistledomes. Herbert had found some salt deposited by evap- evaporation. Herbert had found some salt deposited by evaporation in the hollow of the rock, and this mineral was very welcome. The Pencroft asked the reporter if he wished to accompany Herbert and himself to the forest where they were going to try to hunt. But on consideration, it was thought necessary to keep in the fair, and to be at hand in the highly improbable event of Neb requiring aid. The reporter accordingly remained behind. To the chase, Herbert, said the sailor, we shall find ammunition. We shall find ammunition on our way and cut our weapon in the forest. We shall find ammunition. We shall find ammunition on our way and cut our weapon in the forest. But at the moment of starting, Herbert observed that since they had no tinder, it would perhaps be prudent to replace it by another substance. What? Asked Pencroft. Burnt, burnt, burnt lime, said the boy. That could, in case of need, serve for tinder. The sailors thought it was sensible advice, only it had the inconvenience of necessitating the sacrifice of a piece of handkerchief. Notwithstanding, the thing was well worth while trying, and a part of Pencroft's large checked handkerchief was soon reduced to the state of a half-burnt rag. This inflammable material was placed in the central chamber at the bottom of a little from all wind and damp. Okay, let's stop here. We hadn't found the captain. We'll look for him tomorrow or later.